She looked over my shoulder at the sink full of bleach water and asked, clear as a bell, "Where's our dinner?" I still had the plastic bag in my hand from the clothes I'd just changed off my husband. The washer was thumping through a sanitized cycle. The bedroom door was closed to keep the smell of antiseptic from him. I pointed at the kitchen. She blinked like she hadn't considered that answer. I was too tired to dress it up. 3 weeks earlier, my husband fell off a loading dock and fractured 2 vertebrae. No surgery, but bed rest in a rigid brace, slow walks to the bathroom with help, and a care plan taped to our fridge by the home nurse. Wash hands, masks if sick, no long visits, 30 minutes, quiet between checks. It was all plain print and boxes for times. He threw up the first night from the pain medicine. We changed the pill and the schedule. He threw up again the next day. I learned to roll him without twisting his back. I learned the rhythm of gauze and the way a pillow needs to be fluffed to keep a shoulder from going numb. I learned what disposable gloves feel like after an hour. His family arrived daily. They love him. They also love an audience. My mother-in-law has a voice that could run a factory floor. She stood at the foot of the bed and told me how often to change ice packs and which pillowcase looked cooler for a fever. She never lifted a pack. "Broth, not soup," she said. "Soup has too much going on." She didn't bring broth. Most afternoons followed the same steps. They looked in on him for 5 minutes and patted his shoulder like a mayor greeting a voter. Then they moved to the living room and stayed for hours. I made coffee because I am not rude. I set out crackers because I like to control where crumbs go. If my brother-in-law came with his wife and kids, the house shifted keys. The kids ran down the hall. Someone always put a sweating soda on a coaster and left a ring anyway. I set trash bags by the counter. They treated them like decoration. Each night I wiped cabinet doors and handles till the towel stopped coming up sticky. Yesterday he threw up again. Second time that day. I stripped the bed, changed his shirt, sprayed the mattress cover, started the sanitize cycle, and opened the window for 10 minutes. I coaxed him to sip water. I called the nurse instead of trusting search results. She adjusted the anti-nausea pill time and told me to watch for signs of dehydration. I wrote the dose and hour on the whiteboard by the door. When I came downstairs, dizzy from standing and crouching, I found my mother-in-law scrolling her phone, my father-in-law asleep in the chair, and my brother-in-law yelling at a game that would not answer him. I set the laundry basket down. "Hey, where's our dinner?" my mother-in-law said again. I pointed at the kitchen. "Same place it's always been." She stared like I'd answered in a language she didn't speak. I meant, "What are we having?" "I'm feeding 1 patient tonight," I said. "The rest of you know where the plates live." She made a sound. The room quieted the way rooms do when a dog lifts its head. My brother-in-law's wife stood, checked the time, and said she needed to get the kids home for homework. I thanked her for coming. She went red like I'd praised her on a test and her teacher might hear. They left. My mother-in-law said she had never been spoken to like that in her son's house. "He needs comfort," she added. "Family is comfort." "Family can be comfort," I said. "Family can also be noise." She rolled her eyes. "I'll let this go because you're stressed. We'll be back tomorrow." "Call first," I said, "and bring what you plan to eat." She muttered about gratitude on the way out. I closed the door and put my forehead against the wood for a count of 5. Then I went upstairs and checked his pulse because numbers are steady when feelings are not. He slept. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the room be simple for 1 minute. Man, brace, pillow, a machine finishing a spin. The nurse came in the morning with clean tape and a new note for the chart. She checked the skin under the brace and the way he stood to the bathroom. On her way out, she lowered her voice. "Do you want me to talk to visitors about the 30-minute rule?" "Yes," I said before she finished. "He isn't resting." "Okay." She tucked another copy of the care plan under a magnet. "Post this one at eye level. It helps." I taped it to the living room wall by the thermostat where no one could pretend not to see it. I set a cheap kitchen timer on the coffee table. I put a plastic bin by the sink and labeled it Visitors' Dishes. I made a small sign for the front door, short visits only, patient resting, not rude, clear. At noon, his parents came without calling. My mother-in-law walked in like she was punching a time card. She eyed the paper on the wall. "What's this?" "Discharge plan," I said. 30-minute visits. She read the line like it was a dare. "We're not hospital staff. Neither am I," I said. "But the rules still work." She headed for the stairs. I stood in the hall with my hand out. "He's asleep. He'll wake if I say his name," she said. "That's why we're limiting visits," I answered. "He needs to sleep without performing." Her husband stared at his shoes. He is a kind man who chooses quiet when speech would help. 15 minutes later, my brother-in-law arrived with a bag of fast food that smelled like salt and comfort. He handed a burger to his father and a carton of fries to his mother. Grease bled through the paper. No one washed their hands. I pointed to the sink. No one moved. I set the timer for 30 minutes, turned it to face them, and sorted the mail at the dining table where I could see the stairs. When the bell rang, I stood and said, "That's your visit." My mother-in-law laughed, the short laugh that means you're joking, and stayed seated. I walked to the door and opened it. "I'll see you tomorrow if you call first." She said I was controlling access to her son. "I'm caring for my husband," I said. "It isn't the same thing." That night, I wrote a message in the family group chat. "Updates in this thread only. Visits by text appointment. Bring your own food. Label cups. Wash hands. 30 minutes. Quiet BI added a photo of the nurse's plan and the timer. My brother-in-law sent a thumbs up. My mother-in-law replied with a long paragraph about respect. I turned my phone face down and made tea. The next afternoon, the doorbell rang. My camera showed my in-laws and a foil dish. I exhaled. Casserole counts as peace. I opened the door. She swept past me and parked the dish on the stove like a treaty. "Where should I put our plates?" she asked. "In the cabinet," I said. "Where they live." "You can at least serve the elderly," she said. "I can at least keep him from vomiting again," I said. "He can smell food from the bedroom." She made a sound, but she didn't argue. I fixed 2 plates and poured water. I didn't sit. The nurse called to say she could stop by and check the brace fit. I said yes. The nurse arrived with her calm and a clipboard. She greeted the parents and asked them to use hand sanitizer. She glanced at the timer and nodded. My mother-in-law said the 30 minutes was silly and that in her day, families stayed until the patient felt better. The nurse looked at me. I nodded. She addressed the room, not just the one person. "Short visits reduce fatigue and infection risk. If you love him, give him rest." There it was, a sentence with authority. My mother-in-law folded her arms. "We're being treated like guests." "You are guests," the nurse said, still kind, "in a home that is also a sick room." They left at the bell. At the door, my mother-in-law said, "Tomorrow I'll bring dinner again if you promise to be polite." "Bring dinner," I said. "Polite is everyone washing their own dishes." She flinched at everyone as if I'd put her in a category she didn't join. By Friday, we had something like order. I set visiting hours, 2 to 4, and wrote them on the whiteboard. I kept the door locked and answered the bell instead of letting people parade in. I placed a basket of masks in the entry. My brother-in-law's kids came once, washed up, waved from the hall, and left before anyone cried. I texted photos of my husband's good minutes, sitting up, smiling, walking 3 steps, and shut my phone off at 9. I slept 4 hours in a row for the first time in a week. Saturday morning, my mother-in-law arrived early with her husband and a cousin I hadn't seen since Thanksgiving. She brought no food. She sat on the sofa like she owned the fabric. "We're hungry," she said. "What's for lunch?" "There's bread," I said. "Peanut butter? Fruit? Make what you like. Clean what you use. 30 minutes. She frowned. "What happened to serving your elders?" "I am serving the person with the injury," I said. "You're welcome to the kitchen." She stood like I'd hit a rank she kept in her pocket. "In this family, women feed visitors." "In this house, adults feed themselves," I said. She opened her mouth for a fight, and from upstairs my husband called my name, thin and urgent. I took the stairs 2 at a time. He had tried to shift and pinched the brace. His face had gone gray. I loosened and reset the straps. I checked the skin. I gave the anti-nausea on schedule. He breathed through his teeth and let go. I wiped his forehead. He apologized. He always apologizes. I told him to save his breath. He slept. I went back down. She was in my dining room cabinet looking for platters. "Where do you keep the good ones?" she asked. "In the hutch," I said, "for holidays." "This is family," she said. "That's a holiday." "No," I said, "that's a word." She slammed the door and said she was calling her church friend to pray for my attitude. I didn't ask for the number. I didn't touch my phone. Sunday night, I hit a wall. He threw up again. T.I. changed him. I changed the bed. I showered at midnight and swayed in the hot water. I stood on the bath mat because sitting felt like something I didn't have time to do. I got into bed smelling like soap and bleach and cried once, fast and quiet. In the morning, I called the nurse and said we needed help that wasn't medical. "Care coordinator?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "B, and a family talk." She gave me a date and time. Monday at 4. "I'll be there," she said. "I'll run it. You just stand still." At 4, the living room looked like a waiting room. My mother-in-law, father-in-law, brother-in-law, his wife, the cousin, and the coordinator in a neat cardigan with a folder. I stood by the whiteboard. The timer sat on the coffee table like a school prop. The coordinator smiled, the way nurses smile when they vaccinate children. Steady, ready for crying. She started with the discharge orders: rest, hand hygiene, 30 minutes, quiet. She pointed with her pen. "This plan protects him," she said. "Our job is to follow it." My mother-in-law crossed her legs like a seatbelt. "We love him. We're here every day." "Thank you," the coordinator said. "Now here's how to help." She put a 1-page grid on the table labeled meals, laundry, yard, errands. Pick a slot if you want to contribute. If not, keep your visit short and bring your own snack. Silence. My brother-in-law's wife raised her hand like she was back in school. "We can do Wednesday dinner," she said, "and yard work on Saturday." "Thank you," the coordinator said, writing. "We're not staff," my mother-in-law said for the second time that week. "We're family." "Exactly," the coordinator said. "Staff gets paid. Family brings soup." The line landed. Simple. True. My mother-in-law looked at me. "You made this to shame us." "I made this so I don't fall down," I said. "If I fall, he falls." My husband stirred upstairs. My father-in-law stood like a man waking from a long nap. "We'll take Tuesday lunch," he said. My mother-in-law started to object. He touched her elbow. "We'll take Tuesday lunch," he repeated, and then asked, "Do we wash the pot here?" "At your house," the coordinator said. "Bring it back clean." The cousin claimed lawn duty. He looked relieved to be assigned a machine. The coordinator wrote his name. My mother-in-law pressed her lips together. "I raised that boy," she said, pointing up. "I know what he needs." "Then you know he hates noise when he's sick," I said. "Give him quiet." She drew a breath, and for a second I braced for the old voice. Then my husband called from the stairs. Not strong, not loud, just enough. "Mom," he said. "Listen to her." That was the sentence the room needed. The coordinator smiled into her folder like she had been expecting it. My mother-in-law sat back. She nodded once. "Fine," she said. "Tuesday lunch." "Thank you," I said. I meant it. I didn't need an apology. I needed a casserole with a lid. The plan worked because it was written and because we had a witness. Visitors came during the window, washed their hands, set the timer, spoke low, and left on the bell. My brother-in-law's wife showed up with foil pans and labeled everything with tape and a date. The cousin mowed and waved from the yard instead of coming in to narrate it. My father-in-law brought soup and washed the pot at home. My mother-in-law came with him, sat 28 minutes, asked if I needed anything from the store, and left. She didn't hug me. She didn't glare either. We were back at 0, which is better than negative. Quiet helped. He started sleeping in longer runs. The nausea eased with the timing change. The brace stopped rubbing. We kept water going in small sips. On Friday, he walked to the bathroom without swaying. I cried in the hall where he couldn't see because I didn't want to turn his progress into a performance. A week later, the pastor stopped by for 10 minutes. He read the paper on the wall and smiled at the timer. "Good system," he said. "I wish more families did this." "We needed a backbone," I said. "We borrowed the nurses." He laughed. "Borrow anything? Bring it back in decent shape." My mother-in-law brought a roast on Tuesday. It was good. She left the pan for me to wash and then looked at the sink, remembered, and took it home. Progress. At the door, she asked how long I planned to enforce all this. I pointed at the care plan. "Until the nurse says otherwise." She nodded like a person learning to read a sign. 2 weeks later, the nurse removed the brace. He stood careful and tall. He could sit at the table for meals and rest in the living room if it stayed quiet. I put the timer in a drawer but left the whiteboard. We didn't need to erase rules to feel better. We needed them close in case the house forgot. On her last visit, the nurse hugged me. "You did the hard part," she said. "I had help," I said. Finally. After she left, I slid the extra plan and the sign-up sheet into a clear sleeve and wrote, "What worked" at the top. Not a trophy. A tool for the future. Someone in this family will need it again. I'm not starting from 0 next time. For a few days, the house felt like a house again. Dish in the sink, laundry basket with room, a man at the table breathing easier and smiling at nothing. Then came the night that tested all of it. It was a Sunday. Church had let out. My mother-in-law texted at noon that she and a few ladies would stop by with food. I replied, "Visiting hours 2-4. At 1:30, the bell rang anyway. I checked the camera and saw 4 church friends with covered pans and perfumes strong enough to announce their arrival through glass. My husband dozed in the chair for the first time in days. I opened the door a crack. "2," I said. "We're here now," one of them answered, already stepping in. The living room filled with bodies and smell and kindness that did not check the posted rules. My mother-in-law hugged him hard enough to shift the pillow. People set pans on the stove and clanged lids and asked questions over each other. He tried to smile. He went pale. I saw the wobble and reached for the basin. He threw up tea. He kept throwing up. I moved him back toward the bedroom while 2 visitors asked where I kept serving spoons. My mother-in-law said he needs to eat something, and the oldest of the friends dabbed perfume on her wrist out of habit, and the scent hit the room like a spray. He retched again. His lips looked wrong. I called the nurse. She told me to take him in. I called for an ambulance because I didn't want him in the front seat of my car if he got worse. The church friends moved at last. They cleaned the pans off the stove and stacked them by the door, talking about prayers. My mother-in-law started to follow the gurney. I told her she could meet us there later, not now. She opened her mouth to argue, and my father-in-law put a hand on her arm and said one word: "Stop." At the hospital, they gave fluids and something gentle that soothed his stomach. They watched his oxygen. They checked that nothing had torn. He stabilized. He slept. A resident read the discharge sheet aloud and circled the same lines the nurse had posted 3 weeks earlier. Short visits, quiet, no perfumes, no food smells near the patient. She handed me a copy with today's date. I sat in the hard chair, the new paper in my lap, and let the anger pass through like heat. It left something steady behind. I went home that night with him, helped him into bed, taped the new sheet next to the old one, and set the timer back on the table. This time I added a marker no one could pretend not to see. The marker was bright and impossible to miss. I drew a line on the timer's face that matched the line on the new discharge sheet and left both in plain sight. I took a photo of the paper with today's date and sent it in the family thread with 6 words. Hospital again, rules start over, no perfumes. Then I turned my phone face down and sat by the bed until his breathing evened out. In the morning, I made coffee strong enough to taste like something. I aired the rooms with the bedroom door closed. I wiped the doorknobs and washed the basin and set fresh towels out. I wrote a short message to the family, visiting paused 48 hours, meals welcome, porch drop only. I ended with one line that was not a threat. It was a promise to myself. If someone arrives early or unannounced, I will not open the door. At noon, my father-in-law texted to ask what soup travels best. I told him any soup in a lidded pot and wiped my eyes because a considerate question changes the temperature of a house. He arrived at 2, rang the bell, set the pot on the porch table, and waved through the glass. My mother-in-law sat in the passenger seat, hands folded around a paper napkin. She did not get out. He held up a bag of rolls in his other hand and pointed at the gate like he was asking permission. I nodded. He left both and drove off. No demands, no performance. The house stayed quiet. My husband slept for 2 hours straight for the first time since the perfume afternoon. When the 48 hours ended, I wrote a new note for the thread. If you want to visit, book a slot. No more than 2 at a time. No perfumes, no food smells, no loud voices, no children this week. Bring what you plan to eat. Clean what you use. 30 minutes. I added the photo again with the date and the circle around the lines. My brother-in-law sent the thumbs up. His wife added, "We will do Wednesday dinner and Saturday yard." My mother-in-law wrote, "We will come Tuesday." I replied, "Tuesday lunch from you has been helpful." She answered with a period. That dot was the smallest yes I have ever seen, but it was a yes. The care coordinator called to check in. I told her what had happened and what I changed. She asked if I wanted her to speak to anyone. I said only if asked. I told her the pastor had been steady. She offered to email a simple 1-page list for church volunteers about visiting in homes after injury or surgery. "No names," she said. "Just the advice." I said yes. She sent it. The pastor printed 15 copies and set them on the table by the door with the bulletins. The paper did more work than any speech would have. People do better when the rules are written and not personal. On Thursday, my brother-in-law pulled up with a mower, and the cousin brought a trimmer. They waved through the window and kept their noise outside. My neighbor saw the work, came over with a broom, and swept the sidewalk edge like it was her idea. I waved my thanks. When the mowing ended, the cousin left a bag of mulch by the steps with a note that said he would return the next day to spread it. He did. He texted me a photo of the neat line by the hedge and did not ask for approval. He was proud of a clean edge. Pride is easier to hold when it is tied to a task. Friday afternoon, my mother-in-law arrived on time with a lidded dish and a clean towel for carrying it. She wore no perfume. She washed her hands at the sink without being prompted, took a seat at the far end of the couch, and looked at the timer. I set it for 30 minutes. She asked how he was feeling. I said he was better than Sunday. She asked if he could have broth. I said yes if the room was quiet. She nodded and did not stand to check for herself. She did not ask where plates lived. She found them. I did not offer to serve. She did not ask me to. When the timer rang, she stood, rinsed her bowl, washed it, dried it with her own towel, and put it away. She wiped the counter once with the towel and looked at me, waiting to see if she had overstepped. I said thank you. It was a real thank you, not a score, keeping one. She left the roast for dinner and walked out with her pan under her arm. The next day, the pastor stopped by again. He congratulated my husband for sitting outside for 10 minutes in the shade. He told him the church had formed a meal rota for the next week and that all drops would be porch only unless we said otherwise. He said he would open announcements with a reminder that fragrance-free is care when someone is sick. He didn't say why, he didn't say who. He said it like a community rule that would stay even when we no longer needed it. I thanked him. He thanked me back for letting the congregation help, which was a polite way to say I had stopped trying to do everything alone. We both smiled at the same time. It felt like a truce with the part of me that makes lists until the pen runs out. Sunday came and nothing bad happened. He ate half a bowl of broth and kept it. He dozed. I sat in the chair with a book I didn't read and listened to the quiet. The quiet felt like a skill we had learned together. The follow-up appointment with the spine clinic fell on a Wednesday. My husband wanted his parents there because he knows his mother trusts white coats more than me. I do not blame her. She has survived her life by believing certain voices. We all do. If the clinic voice helped us hold the line, I would take it. We arrived early and took the end chairs by the window. My mother-in-law came with my father-in-law. She had a clean notepad and a pen. She smelled like laundry soap, which I decided to take as a sign. The nurse took my husband back for x-rays. We waited. My mother-in-law bounced her foot in small kicks and stopped herself each time, like she was practicing a new habit. When the doctor came in, he looked at the chart, looked at my husband's gait, and nodded. He spoke in short sentences that landed where they should. Healing on schedule. No heavy lifting, no twisting. Keep walks short, no long visits. Avoid smells. Let the caretaker set the rules. Let the caretaker set the rules. He said that last part again, with his eyes on my husband. Let the caretaker set the rules. Then he turned to the rest of us. He said, one voice. He didn't say mine. He didn't need to. My mother-in-law wrote the words one voice on her pad and drew a box around them. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. It was public enough for the people who mattered and private enough to keep dignity intact. On the way out, she asked if she could take the next Tuesday lunch and Thursday lunch as well. I said that would be helpful. She said she would double the recipe and split it with her neighbor who had just had knee surgery. I nodded. The doctor's sentence had done something my sentences could not. It had moved from my rules to the rule. At home, I updated the fridge grid, names filled in, tasks settled in their squares. When the grid is full, people stop arguing about who cares more. They show up or they don't, and the empty square shows the truth kindly. The squares were full enough that week to make the kitchen feel like a place where order belonged. 2 days later, my brother-in-law's wife texted to ask if the kids could wave at the window after school. I said yes at 4 for 5 minutes. She arrived on the dot. They stood on the path with handmade cards and held them up high. My husband waved from the chair. They waved back and ran to the car. No one begged, no one cried. Boundaries and 5-minute rituals teach children that love can fit into small boxes and still be love. Meal drops grew cleaner as people learned our porch. The first week came with foil pans and mystery ingredients. The second week came with labels and lists of allergens and heating instructions. The third week came with a few gift cards for the nights when a pot felt like too much. The fourth week came with fewer drops because he was eating more normally and the house needed less help. That is how it should go. Help is a bridge, not a neighborhood. My husband started walking to the mailbox and back with a hand on the rail. He sat in the living room for an hour mid-morning when the house was at its quietest. He washed his hands and tried not to scratch under the healing skin. He complained about the brace ghost sensation like a shirt tag that isn't there. He asked me to leave the window open a little longer in the afternoon because the outside didn't smell like antiseptic. He apologized less. He said thank you more. He told me once that the hardest part had been looking weak in front of his mother. I told him that isn't his job. He laughed once, short and real, like a person who had said a thing he needed to hear in his own voice. My mother-in-law softened in small places. She learned to leave her purse by the door and her advice in the car. She washed her hands and used the towel on the counter instead of rifling through drawers. She sat at the far end of the sofa and asked for a blanket if she was cold instead of walking to the closet and rearranging the shelf. She checked the timer without making a noise about it. When it rang, she stood and kissed the air near my husband's head because she had learned to keep from touching the spot that hurt. She still had pride. Pride is not a crime. Pride needed a container. The container was the plan on the wall. One afternoon, I found her in the kitchen washing 3 glasses and drying them with her own towel. She stacked them upside down on the rack like a person who has returned glasses to the same cabinet for 40 years. She said without looking up that she had been wrong to bring her friends without asking. I turned the kettle off and waited because I didn't want to pour noise over a good sentence. She added that she had thought about how she would feel if someone had done that to her when my husband was small. I said it would have made her crazy. She laughed one time. It was a real laugh. She said she would never wear perfume to my house again for any reason. I believed her. The cousin stayed on yard duty as if he had found his lane. He sent pictures of the mower lines like they were his grandkids. He stacked the extra bags of mulch at the back fence and wrote the number on a piece of tape so we would remember how many we had. He rang the bell only when he had a question. He waved and left. Tasks saved him from saying the wrong thing. Not every person is a visitor by nature. Some people are a list of jobs and a nod. He is one of those, and the house was better for it. My brother-in-law tried to stretch a visit once because the game had gone to overtime. I walked to the TV and pressed the power button. He looked like I had unplugged his oxygen, then laughed because he hurt himself. He stood and picked up his plate and washed it. "Timer," he said, pointing to it like it was a referee. He left on a line I wanted repeated. He said, "See you tomorrow at 2 if you want us." He put the "if you want us" in the sentence like it weighed something. It did. We had one more test run. The church announced a combined meal for several families in the neighborhood who had been dealing with illness or injury. They called it Soup Sunday. It would be outside in the churchyard, tables spaced, hand sanitizer at every station, serve yourself, take home if you prefer. My mother-in-law asked if she could pick up 2 servings for us and drop them on our porch. I said yes at 1. She arrived at 1 with 2 closed containers, a bag of rolls, and a typed list of ingredients. She waved from the steps. Later, she sent a photo of the dessert table and a note saying she had told the ladies not to plan to stop by, that we had a system and it worked. That may have been the public confirmation I didn't know I needed. The pastor would have thanked me from the pulpit if I had asked, but I didn't want a speech. I wanted my mother-in-law to declare our house a rules, first house to her friends. She didn't. A week later, the home nurse discharged us. She hugged me at the door and told my husband to keep doing the boring things. She told me to keep the plan in a folder for next time any of us gets knocked down. "You built something steady here," she said. "It will hold again." I slid the papers into the sleeve that already said what worked. I added the hospital sheet with the date and the circle around the lines that had saved us twice. When the brace was a memory, we had a small dinner with the people who had carried the rota. No balloons, no speeches, just soup and bread and a cake on a plate. My mother-in-law arrived with a salad in a bowl and asked where the tongs lived. I told her and she found them. She set the bowl on the table and did not look at me for instruction. She had learned to share a room. My father-in-law told a quiet story about a bridge he had helped repair years ago where the crew chief kept a simple rule on a clipboard. One person talks, everyone works. He said our house had felt like that the last month. One person talks, everyone works. He said it like a compliment and like a relief. When the meal ended, people washed their own plates without being told. The cousin wiped the counter. My brother-in-law stacked chairs that didn't need stacking because he needed a job, and I let him. My mother-in-law took the trash out to the can without a comment. On her way back in, she touched the timer, still on the table, though we hadn't used it that night. "Leave it here," she said. "It looks right." I left it. After they left, my husband and I sat in the quiet and did nothing. Doing nothing together is a lost skill. We found it by keeping other people's noise low. He reached for my hand and said he was sorry for how hard it had been. I said he was healing and I was sleeping. He said he would buy a timer for his mother's house. He meant it as a joke. It sounded like a plan. A month later, we went to his parents' house for Sunday lunch, our first time out for something that wasn't a clinic. The table was set, the food was simple. My mother-in-law poured water. She asked what time we wanted to leave so she could keep it short. She did not test the edge. She did not ask me to serve. She sent a plate home with us and told me to heat it when I was tired and not to save it for a day I wanted to perform. The woman who had asked, "Where is our dinner?" now sent dinner home labeled and ready. I wrote that transformation down after we got back and put the note in the sleeve, not to frame it, but to remind myself that families can change when rules are simple and held. Spring turned into the kind of weather that forgives people for having been difficult in the winter. My husband could carry light things and stand at the stove long enough to stir. He made me an omelet one morning. The eggs weren't pretty. I ate every bite because adult care tastes like that sometimes. He put the pan in the sink and washed it. He dried it and put it back where it belonged without asking. These details matter in the language of a house. We set a new visiting rule that will outlast this injury. Call before you come. If you ask, you are more likely to hear yes. If you don't, you will meet a locked door and a sign that says, "See you at 2." We put the sign in a drawer and only take it out when needed. The timer lives on the table the way a fire extinguisher lives under a sink. It is not a threat, it is a tool. One afternoon, I found my mother-in-law and my father-in-law in our yard without a text first. I felt my shoulders go up toward my ears until I saw what they were doing. They were sitting on lawn chairs by the back fence, together, quietly, watching the cat roll in the sundae. They had a bag with sandwiches and a thermos. They had chosen the yard because the house still makes them feel like they have to talk. I opened the window and said hello. My mother-in-law held up 2 cups and asked if we wanted tea. We didn't. They poured the tea into their own cups and passed ours through the window. They left after 20 minutes. I did not write them up in my head. People who try make progress in awkward shapes. You let the good shapes stand and nudge the others. We reached the first month without an incident, and then the second. I took the sleeve labeled what worked and added a final page that said, in my handwriting, 3 truths that we learned the hard way. The first line said, put rules on the wall. The second line said, short visits help more than long speeches. The third line said, when someone asks for dinner, point to the kitchen and sit down. I slid the sleeve onto the shelf with the other things we keep for when life breaks. Manuals, warranties, the binder with insurance papers, the folder with passports. A household keeps its own library of how to go on. Every now and then, someone in the family starts to tell the story like a joke. Remember when she pointed at the kitchen? The joke lands and softens into respect because the end of the story is not a fight. The end of the story is measured visits, clean counters, full bowls, a man standing steady, and a mother who learned that help can be washing a dish she used. The laugh is a release, not a weapon. I can live with that. The last time the pastor stopped by, he stood on the porch and asked how we were. I said fine. He glanced at the timer on the table and smiled. You kept it. It keeps us, I said. He nodded. I might borrow that line for a sermon one day. You don't need to borrow, I said. Just tell people we learned how to make a quiet room. He said people forget that quiet is work. I agreed. He left with an empty loaf pan he had brought 2 weeks earlier. He had written his name on a piece of tape on the bottom. I had washed it and set it by the door because I knew he would come by for it, and I wanted to be ready without scrambling. That is what the last months taught me. Make the job small enough that you can finish it without calling a meeting. Put the pan by the door. Put the rule on the wall. Put the timer on the table. Put your hand on the wood for 5 seconds after a hard conversation, and then get back to work. If anyone asks me what we did to fix the problem, I do not list the hospital or the church copies or the coordinator's grid. I say we made dinner the responsibility of the person who wanted dinner, and we kept the sick room a room for a sick person, not a lobby. I say we wrote things down and let the paper speak when our voices were tired. I say we remembered that love is not measured in hours on a sofa. It is measured in leaving when the bell rings and coming back when asked. My husband is back at work on light duty. He carries nothing heavier than a clipboard. He wears shoes that support his back and listens to the physical therapist like it is a class he wants to pass. He goes to bed earlier. He drinks water like it is medicine. He thanks me without making the thanks about his guilt. I accept without making it about my score. My mother-in-law still calls at odd times to check if he is eating. I answer when I can. When I cannot, I let it go to voicemail and call back when the sink is empty. She has adopted the phrase porch drop as if it were part of our family tree. She has taught it to her friends. If I meet them at the grocery store, they tell me they like the phrase. I nod and keep moving because I have learned to protect the time that keeps a house running. If you are standing in a kitchen with bleach on your hands and someone asks where their dinner is, here is what I can offer. Point to the kitchen. Say where the plates live. Keep your voice flat and your back straight. Put a timer on the table and a plan on the wall. Ask a nurse to stand in your living room with a clipboard and call the meeting a safety talk. Let the people who want to help sign their names next to jobs. Let the people who only want to sit discover that the chairs are taken by those who worked and are resting for a few minutes before they leave. We did not become saints. We became organized. Organization made space for kindness to show up without being trampled. My mother-in-law will still tell me the better way to make broth. I will still ignore her and make it the way I know my husband swallows best. She will still sniff when I use store rolls. I will still set the rolls on the table and butter one for her without asking if she prefers a different brand. Progress is not the absence of old habits. It is the presence of a system that keeps those habits from running the day. One evening, months after the brace went into the closet, I was washing 2 plates after a quiet supper when my mother-in-law called to ask if she could bring a casserole by the next day. She said she had made 2 by accident. I said yes to 10 in the morning. She laughed and said she knew the drill. She arrived at 10, rang the bell, handed me the dish with both hands, and said she would pick the pan up on Friday. She asked if she could run the vacuum in our living room while she was there because she had the machine in her trunk after doing her own floors. I said yes. She vacuumed without rearranging furniture, emptied the canister into the trash, and took the vacuum with her. She waved and left. I stood in the kitchen and watched her car pull away with the same small feeling you get when the last piece of a puzzle clicks without force. It takes time, and when it fits, you do not need the clap. You just move on to whatever is next. Whatever is next for us looks like this most days. We cook what we want or heat what someone dropped on the porch. We sit at the table and talk about small things. We answer the bell only during the hours anyone was invited. We keep a sleeve on the shelf that says what worked. We keep the timer where we can reach it without having to explain why it exists. We keep the house as a house. When we are asked where dinner is, we point to the kitchen and say where the plates live. And when someone is sick here again and there will be a next time for someone, we will not have to relearn the quiet way to help. That is the whole of it. We learned to tell the room what it is. We learned to feed the person who needed feeding first. We learned to let paper carry the heavy part of the argument. We learned to be kind without being crushed. We learned to leave when the bell rang. And yes, we learned to answer a loaded question with a finger pointed at a room where grown adults can make themselves a sandwich, wash the knife, and put it back where it belongs.